Hi, Ian. So, why do you think so many founders end up chasing investors before they are really ready?
I think it's largely down to the psychology of engagement, which means that the extremes tend to dominate the media as a way to shock or inspire. For example, when Northwest-based startup Playtime Learning raised £250,000 investment, it was hardly headline news. Nobody knew about it. It wasn't memorable. It didn't stand out. But when French startup Mistral raised over 100 million in a seed round without having a product to demo, it was everywhere. And since the dawn of this new AI-driven era, similar stories have been widespread and frequent. But even before that, if we go back to 2008, Dropbox raised 6 million when it was losing money and operating with a freemium model. Today it's valued at over 10 billion. 2010, Airbnb raised 7 million when it was losing a fortune of revenues of less than 100,000 a month. Today's valuation, 50 billion. 2011, Uber, 11 million when it was operating in San Francisco only. Loss-making, hardly any revenue. Today it's valued at over 180 billion. Also in 2011, Pinterest. It raised 10 million without any revenue. Today it's valued at over 18 billion. Same year, Stripe raised 2 million when the product was in beta testing with no revenue. Today it's valued at over 90 billion. And there are plenty of similar examples where large investments haven't worked out. WeWork raised 7 million in 2011 when they just had a few co-working spaces in New York, minimal revenue, losing money hand over fist. At one point they were worth 47 billion in 2019 before filing for bankruptcy in 2023. Kazoo in the UK, founded in 2018, raised more than 30 million in seed funding, going on to be valued at 8 billion in 2021 before filing for administration in 2024. But the impact of those deals splashed across every media channel has a real impact on founder behaviour.
So, what is it that makes founders feel that raising money early is their ticket to success?
So you're a founder who thinks they're on to the next big thing. You set out on your mission fueled by the knowledge that all these companies before you have raised huge amounts of money when they were losing a fortune with hardly any revenue to speak of, and many are now worth billions. What do you expect it to do? How do you think that's going to play out? Are you going to follow the route taken by businesses 40 years ago when growth only came from reinvesting profits and selling equity wasn't really heard of? When I tried to set up my first business, unless you mixed in the most connected circles, the only option really was to borrow from the bank. And when I was 21 years old and they would only insist on match funding, that wasn't going to go very far. So it's not hard really to understand why so many founders look for equity investment as soon as they can do. People are inherently sheep-like. We are followers most of the time. If it works for somebody else, we'll have a go. Even people who consider themselves leaders spend 99% of their time following, be it the clothes they wear, the books they read, the restaurants they eat at. So we're sure, as investors fear missing out on the next big thing and all chase the same types of deals at the same time. The great railway revolution, the dot-com boom, and let's see what's happening with AI at the moment. So too founders will follow the success stories of their startup peers. They see the massive amounts being splashed about, the rapid growth, the huge valuations, and they're convinced their idea is every bit as good as any of those that raise millions. It's just a case of getting in front of the right investors. They tell themselves this is the road to success. It's no wonder, therefore, that so many founders approach investors too early.
And when founders do go to investors at that stage, what usually happens?
Well, unfortunately, they soon discover that their much publicised predecessors are about as rare as hen's teeth. For a start, most of the examples we hear about are in the US because they tend to have a much greater appetite for risk and reward. Whilst the UK has plenty of people purporting to be early stage investors, most are more closely aligned to bowler hat clad bankers than their US counterparts. It's frequently quoted as well that only 0.05% of startups secure VC funding, and being too early is the most common reason for rejection. And the costs involved in the process are staggering. Not only investors inundated with pointless pitch decks, wasting their time reading through them, that don't even stand a chance of funding. But founders are also spending over 40% of their time over a period of 6 to 12 months. Instead of spending that time building their product or acquiring customers, they're doing something that's more or less certain to fail from the start. It's a complete waste. And what's worse, most founders don't even realise The truth is they don't really know what investors are looking for. Slapping a few broad brush labels like pre-seed or seed and business to business or AI doesn't really narrow it down. The probability of success for founders satisfying those labels is still ridiculously low, which by definition implies there must be other criteria that founders are being judged on. It's just not publicised. Let's say I said to you, right, go away and study full-time for 6 months solidly when you already have a job that you need to focus on, and then take an exam where less than 1 in 200 are going to pass. And the reward for passing, if you're lucky enough to pass, will be giving away a slice of your future under some preferential terms in exchange for enough money for the next 18 months or so, where you'll have to prove yourself before enduring another set of similarly weighted exams. Or let's put it another way. What if I said there is a new wonder drug promising everlasting life? And I reel off a list of names who've become super famous as they defy the ageing process. But as it's a medical product, I'm obliged to tell you there's a slight catch. There's a 99.95% chance that you'll die in the next 6 months if you take it. On both counts, you tell me to get lost. And if you didn't, then you shouldn't be running a business. And rightly so. Quite frankly, the fundraising process is ridiculous. You'd have a higher chance of being born on a leap day than raising money from a VC. And yet every year, more than 1 million founders chase the VC dream.
You said that the investment process is absurd, but is there a better way?
Yeah, I believe there is. A much better way. And it's one of the main reasons we set up Focus 15, to be honest. What do investors want? Fundamentally, they want first eyes on businesses that meet their criteria. That's what they're in business for. They're not pitch deck receiving and reviewing businesses. They're in the investment business. So receiving 300 pitch decks every week and having to sift through them to find maybe 1 or 2 that they can take forward isn't merely a consequence of the current process, but it isn't what they actually want. Let's look at what the founders want. Most founders want access to the funds they need to enable growth. They aren't in the pitch deck writing business or the searching for investors business. But again, that's a consequence of the current process. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, what do investors want from founders? It almost sounds silly to have to say it, but investors want founders to spend their time focused on growing their businesses. So it seems absurd that the very people whose best interests are served by founders growing their business are the ones who are actually asking them or forcing them to spend 40% of their time doing something else. It's a bit like asking an athlete to spend half their time writing a book about what training looks like for them rather than spending their time actually training, only for them to be then judged on how well they did in the race. It makes no sense at all. The most precious commodity to investors, and especially founders, is time, and the investment process robs them of that time. So at Focus 15, it's all about making best use of everyone's time. We've developed what we call growth map technology, which allows investors to tell us exactly what they're looking for, and for us to continually assess the businesses we work with across hundreds of data points, so that we can help founders focus on the things that actually improve their business, and also go towards matching them with the right investors at the right time, when their chances of success are significantly higher. Simply put, it's better for founders and it's better for investors.
Sounds interesting, and I hope we'll hear more about it in future. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I suppose, given the pace of the world we live in today, I totally understand the desire to raise external investment as soon as possible. Founders might genuinely think it's their best chance of reaching the stars and beating off their opposition. But I'd urge any founder to resist the temptation until they have enough of the right elements in place to improve the odds. And I'd also urge investors to come to us at Focus 15 and tell us what they're really looking for. Because the sooner we can improve the process, the better it is for everyone.